Hello friends, this is Plot Summary, and you are about to see a movie called Cargo 2017 release. Watch out for spoilers. Please like it and have fun watching it. In a world overtaken by a virus that turns people into zombies within 48 hours, husband and wife, Andy and Kay, and their 1-year-old daughter, Rosie, are living safely on a houseboat in rural Australia. While relocating for the night, Andy spots 2 children playing on the shore of the river. He shouts out to them but continues the cruise after the father, noticing Andy, flashes a revolver in his belt. Later that day, Andy is using a net to fish supplies out of the water. Kay mentions their food rations are starting to run out, but Andy debates her plans to go on land. Andy awakens to Rosie crying and goes in search of Kay. She is in the bathroom of the houseboat, trying to restrain the blood flow from a bite on her knee. She is next seen investigating a pack that was previously acquired by Andy from the river. In it is contained a bracelet that measures the amount of time left for an infected, which Kay puts on, and an injection that neutralizes the brain, so an infected feels no pain whilst transitioning. Andy and Kay discuss their plans, confirming her vulnerability. The family decides to abandon the houseboat and venture to a hospital. Andy and Kay have found a vehicle. While Andy fills the gas tank, Kay notices a yellow slime on the seat back. They narrowly evade a zombie trudging towards them. As they drive away, one is seen struggling to lift its head from the ground. They stop on a deserted stretch of road so Andy can look at a map, and Kay change Rosie's diaper. She collapses off-screen, convulsing and throwing up blood while Andy holds her steady. Thumi is seen once more throwing a snake carcass into the pit, but no sounds are heard. She climbs down to check, and then exits hastily. Kay comes to her senses and checks her wound in the car to see it is oozing yellow slime. In a fit she exits the car, and has a shouting match with Andy, angered he has been trying to keep her developments from her. He subdues her and convinces her to continue with him. Andy breaks the door handle to keep Kay from trying to escape again. On the road, Andy is distracted by a lone man and consequentially crashes the car into a tree, impaling Kay. Andy faints from shock, leaving Rosie strapped in her seat. He comes to hours later and tries to wake Kay, but realizes she has already converted, as evidenced by pus around her eyes and mouth. He is bitten by her while trying to exit the car. Following this, Andy approaches the car, Rosie sitting a distance away safely, and uses one of the injections on Kay. He takes her bracelet and places it on himself instead, then begins traveling on foot with Rosie on his back. Andy arrives at the town he intended to reach, entering a school and meeting Etta, a retired teacher. She helps him clean his wounds and informs him that all the Aboriginal people have left the land, including many of her former students. Andy steps outside and sees fires in the distance, started by the Aboriginals. A woman is seen calling for Thumi. On his journey, Andy stops at some ruins to give Rosie water. He passes several zombies with their heads in the ground, hastily leaving the area, but one rises and proceeds to follow him. He finds a truck and attempts to hijack it, but is stopped by a man named Vic, who saves Andy from the zombie that had been after him, of which Andy was unaware. Vic is trapped under a tank and gives Andy the keys, making him promise to rescue him first, and then they can escape approaching zombies together. Vic takes Andy to his shelter, an outpost formerly part of a gas plant. He meets Vic's wife, Lorraine, who is quietly surprised to see other people who are still people. Vic visits another cage with Andy. He uses entrails, a radio, and blood to lure zombies, all factors which make Andy question himself for a moment. The men return to the shelter, where Lorraine briefly mentions cleaning up Rosie. Andy plays with his daughter before setting her down in a makeshift crib, his hands starting to spasm. He leaves the shelter with an injection, but cannot bring himself to use it. Lorraine comes upon him, confessing she is not Vic's wife, and that Vic let her husband die along with other gas plant workers to save himself. Vic approaches them and knocks Andy out with the butt of his rifle out of suspicion, the latter awakening chained in the same cage as Thumi. Thumi leads Andy to the cage he visited earlier, but the man inside is gone. They evade Vic tracking them down, and spend the night in a small gulch. After releasing each other of their chain, they are presumed to fall asleep, until later in the night Thumi wakes up to heavy breathing and hides with Rosie while Andy rubs his face against blood on the wall. The following morning Andy and Thumi have a conversation about her father's health, which results in Thumi running off after Andy asserts her father will not get better. As they pass through a train tunnel, they encounter Vic. Thumi hides with Rosie inside a parked vehicle on the tracks, while Andy tries to distract Vic. The two men fight and Andy shoots the bullets, but misses both times. Andy, briefly defeated, is unable to help Thumi, who Vic pulls from the car, in the process hitting her head on the rails. She lies in pain, Vic grabbing hold of Rosie. Andy rises to check on Thumi, who is still alive, and then Rosie, who Vic is cradling, lamenting the incidental death of Lorraine. He tearfully hands over Rosie so that Andy can renew his walk with the hurt Thumi. On the way Andy has another lapse, almost indulging in decayed meat. With little time left, Andy asks of Thumi to promise to look after Rosie, with whom Andy shares a farewell before preparing himself for the finalization by placing a guard in his mouth, binding his wrists, and wrapping the meat from earlier on a stick. He then succumbs, his eyes crusted over. The Aboriginal warriors have finished their raid, but Thumi calls out to them with a whistle, drawing attention of the woman, her mother. Thumi and Rosie are riding Andy, who is guided by the meat on the stick, and being perfectly harmless is detained by the warriors while Thumi and Rosie are welcomed back by her mother. One of the warriors attempts to strike Andy with his spear, but Thumi stops him. She takes out Kay's perfume bottle and sprays it one last time, the smell pacifying Andy, for a moment returning his consciousness as he realizes Rosie is finally safe. Thumi then allows the warrior to put Andy out of his misery. The Aboriginal people are seen traveling to a refuge of many of their people where they are welcomed heartily. As Thumi and her mother inspect Rosie, the words "thank you" are read on her stomach, written in white paint which Thumi and the warriors had used to disguise their scent from the zombies. The final shots of the movie are of Andy's plaid shirt and Rosie's fishing bait mobile hung on a tree. Friends, what do you think of this movie? Please like it and subscribe to the channel. I recommend that you watch these videos and wish you a good day.